Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. The tragic disaster of British Columbia's flooding has captured the attention of Canadians from coast to coast. There are so many facets to this story, including, of course, the human tragedy and the personal loss. There are also the economic impacts that will linger for a long time. Joining us to discuss are Colin Metcalf. He is the president of Metcalf and Associates, business consultants in Vancouver. And Kirk Lapointe joins us as well. He is the editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver Media Corporation. Welcome to you both, gentlemen.
Good to see you.
Colin, let's start with you. You've got kind of eyes and ears on the ground here. What's sort of happening now? Is the immediate crisis over?
Well, we're in store for yet another atmospheric river, as the new buzzword has come along. And so I think that we'll find out if we're through the worst of it within the next 24 to 48 hours. But there's another storm coming as they're trying to recover from the previous one that kind of wrapped up on Monday. So we're kind of in between two big weather events, and we'll see the effects of the second one within the next 24 to 48 hours.
How are people who are being affected by this, how are they being helped right now?
Well, it depends where you are. The level of support seems to vary from community to community. I was hearing that the mayor of Princeton was begging for additional resources from the province as early as yesterday. So I'm not sure the status of that request. But the Lower Mainland, I know the mayor of Abbotsford, Henry Braun, is doing yeoman's work to make sure that whatever's happened gets repaired quickly, and whatever's coming doesn't affect the repairs made to date.
Kirk, what's your reaction to all of this? And maybe also tell us a little bit about how you think government is reacting to it.
Yeah, well, as Colin alluded to, Tony, I mean, as we're recording this, obviously there's still much more difficult weather to come. And I think that that's really the thing that we're trying to write about considerably here, is this idea that we're going to be into almost an incessant number of these weather events here in the time ahead. It's too early to tell in a lot of ways about even the extent of the damage, because every day more and more mud is sliding, more and more bridges are kind of finding that their foundations are loose. And I think it's going to be weeks before we really have a good grip on this. And that uncertainty and what it's done in terms of the supply chain, the ability to get goods to market. Our ports here represent about half of our overall shipping in the country, and when they're cut off, it very much is like finding out after a giant earthquake just how isolated you can be, despite all the convenience that you've had.
I take that point, and obviously it's a moving target, and I don't want this to appear to be churlish. When I asked about how government is responding, I mean, maybe they're doing the best they can. Is that your sense of things?
Well, I think there's a genuine and I think legitimate criticism for the slowness of the response to declare an emergency, and this happened as well last summer with the heat dome and with the forest fires. This happened on a weekend, and it appeared as if the leaders of the province were sort of taking the weekend off. It was Monday morning before we really got anything approaching an actual declaration of difficulty, and then the emergency itself only happened on the Wednesday. When you look at Alberta and you look at Washington State, the two adjacent jurisdictions, they were well ahead of British Columbia. And what I can tell you is that their government is going to take, I think, a lot of critique on this for some time to come. The rescue missions were amazing. The individual help was extraordinary. I do think that governments weighed in at all levels in order to make sure that people felt some safety and security in response. But really, the official declaration could have come much sooner, and it could have averted people taking all kinds of regular car trips, doing things on the weekend that put them in some harm's way. Those types of things, I think, could have been genuinely averted.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair comment. And again, it's hard to criticize in the middle of of an emergency like this, but it is important to draw the right conclusions. We're talking with Colin Metcalf. He's the president of Metcalf and Associates, and Kirk Lapointe, who is the editor in chief of Business in Vancouver Media Corporation. We'll be back with both of them after these messages. Please stay with us. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Colin Metcalf of Metcalf and Associates and Kirk Lapointe as well. He is editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver Media Corporation, talking about the ongoing situation in British Columbia. Kirk, maybe, actually, Colin, I'll start with you. Kirk made the point about, how part of the story here is this supply chain crisis, which was sort of on the radar screen of a lot of people before these extreme weather events were happening in British Columbia, but of course has been exacerbated by it. Do you have a point of view on this as well?
Yeah, for sure. Going through COVID, most of the effects on the supply chain were external, with maybe the exception of local trucking issues and concerns around getting goods from the docks into warehouses, et cetera. But for the most part, it was an external effect on Canada's supply chain. Now we've got a domestic internal crisis on our hands as far as the supply chain is concerned. For example, the Trans Mountain Pipeline is closed. We have no fuel coming from Alberta to British Columbia at this point, and we're not sure exactly when that's going to come online. Luckily, we do have some secondary supplies south of the border in Cherry Point for fuel. There is a 30-liter prohibition on any purchases of fuel above 30 liters. That's done on an honorary basis in the Lower Mainland. And I was just down at the gas station the other day getting my allocated 30 liters, and everyone seemed to have been doing their part to ensure that was the case. I think there's 47 ships in the port of Vancouver that are waiting cargo. That's either grain or coal or containers, and that is a huge drayage issue for the Vancouver terminals that are going to be receiving those ships. And right now, there may be some supply on the dock for grain or for coal, but for the most part, there's nothing else coming in. I understand that CP line is going to be limping in. They've done yeoman's work, given the amount of washouts that occurred along the line, but that supposedly is going to be coming online within the next 24 hours. So that's a glimmer of hope, right, as long as this weather system doesn't affect those lines further.
Indeed. Here's hoping for sure. Kirk, this kind of raises the issue, what you and Colin have been talking about, kind of raises the issue about the state of our infrastructure, our roads, our bridges, our pipes. Is this a topic of conversation as well?
It's not a very glamorous one, Tony, as you would know from your history in politics, that people don't go to the polls rushing to vote for the person who's going to create infrastructure that's going to be sustainable. But look, it's apparent that we really haven't learned terribly many lessons out of the pandemic around a lot of this. We haven't learned about the value of the infrastructure. We haven't thought about things like our supply chain. What we tried to do was restore what we had in 2018 and 19 and make the assumption that somehow it's going to be fine in 2021 and onward. And I think this is, I hope, like a true wake-up call for all of us to understand that we need things like the more proximate inventory for some of our goods and services. We need to really focus a bit on our overall consumption patterns, think through what our agricultural availability is in all of our communities so that we're more self-sustaining. I mean, it is really a pretty profound wake-up call. And I'll be interested to see how everybody responds to it, because I know in other places where you've had big natural disasters, it's a bit of a seismic change, no pun intended, around how people think through what it is that they do, what's next to them, how they consume, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, we saw in the U.S., of course, Hurricane Katrina and all of the discussion that would happened after that, and sort of how they rebuilt in a different way there. Do you see, in a sense, that discussion is starting to happen in British Columbia, Kirk?
It's early days, I think, Tony, because again, people are just coming to grips. And I mean, really, it's quite stark when you see the flyovers on parts of our province where 2 weeks ago you had a nice, safe highway to take you to your place. And now there are bridges entirely washed out that have to be, pretty much from scratch, brought back. When you have those kinds of things, and when you have a kind of an honorary rationing of gasoline, of all things, in a part of the country where you think that you've got no shortage of supply, that ought to register with you.
Yeah.
But I think it's still too early to tell. And I think people are still just trying to get a grip on the carnage and what kind of cost it will ensue.
And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Colin Metcalf of Metcalf and Associates, business consultants in Vancouver. And Kirk Lapointe also is joining us. He is editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver Media Group. Colin, lot of things to think about here. You're a good political observer. You understand how the issues management part of government works, and how perhaps the emergency response works. Do you see a lot of coordination amongst the municipal, provincial, and federal governments on this?
I do now, but in the early days of this thing, and Kirk alluded to this earlier, the storm basically came late last week and ended on Sunday. We didn't really get any report from the provincial government until first thing Monday morning. There was no mobile, we all have cell phones. There was no mobile alert telling us not to go to Hope because some of the roads had been washed out.
Right.
There were hundreds of people that were stranded in some of these communities, some of which may have not have begun their journey if they had gotten one of these province-wide alerts. So that's one question that we should be asking ourselves, is why that didn't occur. The other one is again, as Kirk alluded to it earlier, we didn't get a BC provincial state of emergency issued in the province of BC until Wednesday at noon. And they were going on about some cabinet meeting that needed to occur. And it's like, if you're the public safety minister, you better be making sure that the first order of business is to ensure that you've got all of the assets available to you through that state of emergency issuance that comes from the minister and from cabinet. So why they needed to wait 72 plus hours to issue that is beyond me. So I think that there's going to be some review of this. There needs to be some review of this soon. Once we get through, the initial state of emergency that we're in.
Gentlemen, I know it's hard to predict, but I'm just curious whether people are turning their minds to the future state of agriculture in British Columbia. Obviously, that was severely hard hit. Kirk, have you given this some thought at all?
Yeah, I think it is one of those prime areas that people will pay attention to, because you had thousands of animals that lost their lives through all of this. You've got tens of thousands of chicks that were part of the egg supply and the poultry supply. You really have, in a lot of cases, supermarkets now that are struggling in order to get what we took for granted a couple of weeks ago. And it's not to say that we're going to have many, many more of these, Tony, but the truth is that, the way that we have these weather episodes now, it's becoming more regular. And in some respects, we need to think through what it is that we're doing in terms of allocating resources and attention into a couple of areas. Agri-food is one, and I would also say labor and the trades are going to be in grand short supply. I remember when the Fort McMurray fires took place, British Columbia, a lot of British Columbians wound up in Fort Mac helping to rebuild. I don't know where we're going to find the labor in order to rebuild with a sophistication. All of the bridges that are out, all of the homes that have been ruined, all kinds of infrastructure. We brought in the military to get us through a couple of days, but truthfully, it's going to take a very large army of tradespeople in order to get our province built back properly. And we need to give attention to that too.
Yeah, Colin, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. I mean, labor shortages were abounding even before all this hit, right?
Well, one of the problems that we've got with the province of British Columbia right now is that these trades have to be unionized in order for them to be initiated by the government. Now, I heard some discussions earlier today saying that may not be the case. So I think we need all hands on deck. We need the road builders. We need the contractors to come in. We need the experts in these fields to be getting into the field to be able to assess the damage and begin the repairs immediately. And it's going to be a massive cost associated with it. But at the end of the day, it's a cost that I think most taxpayers in British Columbia are going to be willing to bear.
Do you think the provincial government is willing to waive those requirements and let that happen?
I think they're going to need to. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Kirk.
Yeah. No. Go ahead. Yeah.
I think it's going to be a very interesting test ideologically because John Horgan, the premier, staked a fair amount of his basis support on returning a lot of that work strictly into unions, and I think he's going to be hard pressed to stick with that.
Right.
What do you think, Colin?
Yeah.
I agree completely. And if he doesn't, if it isn't a union only edict moving forward, I think that we are going to be in for a much longer and more prolonged, amount of pain, if you would, economic and otherwise. What could take maybe a short period of time is going to be extenuated by that ideological take. But let's hope that doesn't come to be.
Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm Tony Clement, your host, talking about the BC flooding and the ongoing situation there with Colin Metcalf. He is the principal at Metcalf and Associates, business consultants, and Kirk Lapointe is also joining us. He's the editor-in-chief of Business in Vancouver Media Corporation. Kirk, maybe start with you. We've talked a little bit about emergency preparedness and the need to do more on that front. Are there any lessons that the rest of Canada should be observing or concluding as a result of this tragedy?
Well, if you're in Eastern Canada right now, your vulnerability around energy is pretty serious. And so you get a situation like this perhaps happening in Alberta, you're going to find an interesting supply. I think if Line 5 has trouble proceeding, we're going to experience that. I do think that we just have to be prepared, and I know that there's still a lot of debate in this country for some reason about whether climate change is real, whether these are just kind of fluke episodes, 1 in 100 year type of things. But it seems like right here, Tony, we've had at least 3 of these 1 in 100 year events in 1 year. I didn't realize I was 300 years old plus. So I just say, be prepared for this. Right. And be prepared in a really smart way with making sure your infrastructure is well financed and is durable, and making sure that you're personally keeping yourself mitigated from the greatest possible harm when these things occur. And that means doing smart things in terms of your consumption, your proximity to resources, all those kinds of things, and in order to make sure that you're going to stay safe and that your families are going to stay safe.
Colin, you've seen government up close. We've seen the COVID response, of course, nationwide. We've seen at least the initial response here. It's tough for governments, it appears, and correct me if I'm wrong or challenge me on this, but it's tough for governments to take emergency preparedness seriously with all the other balls that are juggling in the air. What's your assessment of the situation?
Well, I was part, as were you, of a government under Stephen Harper that invested hundreds of millions, billions of dollars into the infrastructure across the country through the Build Canada Fund and the APGCI, the Asia Pacific Gateway Corridor Initiative. And those billions of dollars, many of those hundreds of millions of dollars, have simply washed away last weekend through the infrastructure being ripped apart by the ferocity of the storm that hit us. Earlier in the year, Canada was ranked by the World Economic Forum 10th in transportation infrastructure. That dropped down this year from 10th to 32nd. And that was the ranking that the World Economic Forum gave us. Now that this event has happened, I'll be interested to see where our ranking drops further. It's a good indication as to where we are at in comparison to other global economies that we are competing with. I'm afraid that number is going to drop significantly more, and it's going to also ratchet up the concerns that we already have around inflation. The federal government doesn't seem to have a concern as far as spending, but let's see if this issue will become the trigger point for them to spend appropriately in terms of rebuilding the infrastructure, because P3s aren't necessarily something that this government provincially may like to see, but in order to finance some of this infrastructure that we're going to need, I think it may become the new buzzword for 2022 and beyond, even with an NDP government provincially.
Kirk, we've got about 20 seconds left. Do you agree with that assessment by Colin?
Yeah, I think that it's one thing for governments to focus on climate change down the road. We're going to have to deal with climate change literally down the road, like down the road, on our streets, in our communities. And we're going to have to deal with that and spend the money now to take care of ourselves and worry a little bit less about our 20 and 30-year horizons, worry about 20, 30 weeks to take care of ourselves.
Gentlemen, it's been a tough week for you, I know, and a tough few days coming up, so I wish you both health and safety, but thank you for joining us today. Very important discussion with Colin Metcalfe and Kirk Lapointe about the situation in British Columbia. Clearly not over yet, clearly trying to make sense of it all and try to come up with better solutions for the future, but a lot of hunkering down going on as well. So we wish all British Columbians health and safety over the next few days. Thanks for joining us today.